Aloha! Welcome to Departures to Alpha Centauri, sponsored by the United Galactic Federation of Planets. The name of this program is Ships, Part 1, and my name is Merlin. I'm your tour guide. This program is a combination of two live programs that were filmed or were broadcast from XS Tucson on September 17th, 2011, and October 8th, also 2011. The names of those two programs were Aloha, that was UGFP program 4.9, and Life Imitating Art, or UGFP program 4.10. And in that second program, I had a host with me whose name was Ricardo. So you will see him in that second program. These programs are level 1. Notice the Hawaiian shirt, those of you that have watched other UGFP programs, and it's rated PG-13. It is suitable for all audiences, but parents with young children are cautioned. This program is approximately 50 minutes long, and we will use videos from two very popular movies. One movie is Independence Day, and the other movie is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You will note at the end of this video a disclaimer concerning the Copyright Act of 1976, in which Congress allows producers like myself to use copyrighted material for educational or nonprofit use without the permission of the copyright holders. So anybody who's concerned about the use of these movies know that they are being used for nonprofit and educational purposes. So with that, please continue to watch as we go to Aloha. Aloha! Welcome to Departures to Alpha Centauri. My name is Merlin, and I'll be your tour guide tonight. We're live tonight on September 17th, 2011. The name of this program is Aloha. This is a level 1 program, and level 1 programs will always have me in a Hawaiian shirt, which you can see right here. And since the name of this program just happens to be Aloha, you might be able to read the words Aloha on this shirt. We have had some very strange weather here in Tucson. For the last 7 days, we've had monsoons every day, and we've had more rainfall in those 7 days than we get in an entire year. And when you have rain, you have clouds. And clouds play an important role in many science fiction movies, including Independence Day and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Well, I would like to play for you a clip from the movie Independence Day. Wow, awesome. As you could see in that clip, there was a cloud that was moving towards those kids out in Imperial Valley, and something was in the cloud. As you can see in the scene behind me, there's a cloud moving over the Brooklyn Bridge into New York City, and in this case, there's something coming out of the cloud. As you can see, it's big and it's bright. And it's moving very quickly towards downtown New York City. Well, we have movies that have clouds depicted, as I said, in Independence Day. And we also have another great movie called Close Encounters of the Third Kind, in which clouds also appear, and something is in those clouds. Well, I'm here to tell you that last week, on September 9th, 2011, we had clouds like you have never seen here in Tucson. Now, we get an average of 5 inches of rain per year here in Tucson. In those 7 days, we got more than 6 inches of rain. We got a whole year's worth of rain in a 6-day period. We are now over for the year. We're up to like 8 inches. And We were short before that. So we had some incredible clouds. And I know from personal experience that those clouds can dump an enormous amount of water. On Wednesday, I was at Walmart on Valencia, and as I came out of the store, the entire parking lot was a lake. I literally had to carry my shoes because we had to wade through 4 inches of water. And also sad to say, a homeless man lost his life living under a bridge over on the Santa Cruz River when the river just suddenly filled full of water and he was washed downstream. They found his body 5 miles downstream. That is tragedy. That's a tragedy. But they keep warning us here in Tucson, if it's raining hard, stay away from the arroyos, stay out of the low areas, because this water is unbelievable. Well, as we've seen in that clip from Independence Day, sometimes clouds conceal things. And last Friday, on 9/9/2011, this whole series of storms started. The first of the storms hit on September 9th, 2011, and in those storms, we had interplanetary Victor ships. Now, this is going to be very hard for many of you to swallow. I understand. We are living in a very unusual time in the history of mankind. We have been told for thousands of years that something was coming next year, in the year 2012, just before Christmas. And it would stand to reason that if any kind of an evacuation is actually planned, well, last week, for 7 days, we had ships. We had a lot of ships. These are called Victor ships. These ships are 300 feet across, 90 feet in thickness. They're 300 feet across and 90 feet thick. We've already had 109 of these ships in our atmosphere. They've been here since the mid-1950s. We now have over 3,000 of these ships, and they're here to help. These are our friends from beyond our world. Now, as I mentioned, the name of our sponsor of this program is the United Galactic Federation of Planets. Well, this organization of planets is here to help. And as of last week, their ships started arriving. We now have over 3,000 of these ships in our world. And they came in during those 7 days of incredible storms here in Tucson, in just the manner that you saw in that movie clip. Except there's a problem with humans. When these ships arrive in our Earth, they are visible. Humans would freak out if they were to see 3,000 of these ships arriving over the last 7 days. So in order for the ships to conceal themselves, they come in clouds. And as soon as they're here, then they can cloak. They can actually conceal themselves so we can't see them. As opposed to the ships in the movie we just watched, where, in the movie behind me, Independence Day, where those ships came out of the clouds. Those were called destroyers. These are not destroyers. The ships that are arriving for us are called Victor ships. They're the good guys. And in the movie Independence Day, the destroyers literally burned up the planet. Those of you that have seen the movie and remember the storyline, these destroyers took up positions over the major cities around the world, over New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, London, Paris, Moscow. And at a set time, they destroyed all those cities. And they had some incredible special effects, especially when they blew up the White House. It was terrifying to watch. But I promise you, our visitors are not going to hurt anybody. They are here to help. They're good guys. They're not our enemies. Well, these ships are part of 109 ships that came back in 1957. This is a very important date for our world, March 16th, 1957. On that date, a shuttlecraft arrived outside Washington, D.C., and the man on board that shuttlecraft was named Commander Valiant Thor. He is an alien, you might say, from beyond our world, and he came here to meet with the President of the United States, the Vice President, the Chief of Staffs, all the folks in the White House and in the Pentagon, and then he also asked to meet with all the other leaders of the world. Well, Commander Valiant Thor told everyone at the time, in 1957, that he would be here for 3 years, and he wanted to meet with all these dignitaries and authorities. And our government, the United States, promised to allow him to have these meetings, but instead of treating him like a VIP, like a very important person, like they would with a president of another country or a king or a prime minister or someone of importance, instead of putting him in the Blair House, which is reserved for VIPs, they boarded him up, in a sense, at the Pentagon. And they kept him there in an apartment at the Pentagon with 3 armed guards. Well, he has special powers, and he was able to come and go without them knowing. They thought he was still there, but he would leave. And on one of those occasions, he went to a part of New Jersey where he met with a large group of people, other UFO believers, and this was during the meeting. This is the commander, Valiant Thor. It's a close-up, actually, of this picture of the commander. And then we have Vice Commander Don and Vice Commander Jill, who also attended the meeting. Over here. And they kind of like had a picnic, you might say. The folks from the ship met with all these people in New Jersey. This was on in 1958, next year, spring of 1958, and the people that were at the meeting were just normal humans, like all the rest of us, but they were quite amazed to meet these people from outer space. Here's the commander, Don and Jill, and then all these other folks at this gathering in High Bridge, New Jersey, in 1958, a group picture. And the commander allowed an Air Force photographer to take pictures during that meeting, so that's how we have all these photos of Commander Valiant Thor and the other vice commanders. But another interesting part of the story is that this was not the first time that the commander visited our planet. Back in 1929, he wrote a book. The name of the book is called Outwitting Tomorrow, and this is it. Here is a book that was written by a man from outer space, and it is a guidebook on how we could live our lives, how we should live our lives. It has some very valuable information. But how many of you have ever heard of a book that was written by an alien, by a guy from a UFO? But this is the name of the book. I'll put this up here on the board so you can see a little closer. This book is still available, called Outwitting Tomorrow, and it's got a lot of good advice in it. And if you do buy this book, you will find out on the first page that it was first printed in 1939. Now, during this visit to our world, the commander did not meet with the president. He met with other humans and gave this manuscript to a gentleman who then had it printed in 1939. But what's also curious is that when the commander arrived here back in the late 20s, early 30s, he was 30 years old. In this picture of the commander in 1958, he's 30 years old. Today, the commander is 30 years old. Commander Valiant Thor and his people are immortals. They do not age. It's been 80 years since he got here, back in the 1920s, 90 years, but he's still the same age. And he's here to help. His entire objective for meeting with President Eisenhower back in 1959 was to offer immortality to humans. He offered a cure to all illnesses and all diseases. He would have cured cancer, high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, everything. But incredibly, our government turned him down. They said no, it would destroy the economy. It would put doctors and nurses out of work. So they turned down immortality, a pain-free life for all humans, so that doctors and nurses would still have jobs. That has got to be one of the most ridiculous reasons for turning somebody down that I've ever heard of. But they did. Well, there's more to the story. In around Christmas of 1959, 2.5 years after the commander arrived, a good friend of my wife's and mine, his name is Dr. Frank Stranges, was giving a lecture about UFOs at a church in Washington, D.C., and a woman came up to him after the lecture and asked him if he would like to meet the man in that photo. Doc actually had the pictures. He never met the commander, but he had the pictures, and Doc said, "Does a bear sleep in the woods? Is the Pope Catholic? Yes, I would love to meet him." So she took him to the Pentagon the next day, and Doc got to meet the commander. And Doc said it was the most amazing meeting he will ever have in his life, he ever had in his life. He walked into a room full of guards, and they paid no attention to him. And then the commander walked out of another room, the bedroom that he was in, and walked over to Doc and shook his hand and told Doc everything. The commander knew everything about Doc, about his family, about his grandparents, and the whole works. And in Doc's book that he wrote, called Stranger at the Pentagon, he says this was a man who had no fingerprints, who could read minds, and whose garments could not be destroyed. Well, this is an awesome book, I might say. Doc wrote this a few years later. It's called Stranger at the Pentagon. I'll show you a bigger version of it. And you can still get it. It is available. If you go online and put in the words Stranger at the Pentagon, Valiant Thor, Commander, or put in Dr. Frank Stranges, you will get the website where you can order this book. And the book is rather unique, the cover at least. It shows a flying saucer, just like the one I showed you at the beginning, one of the Victor ships, and Doc's name on the front. Well, this book talks all about it. And the first printing for Doc's book was back in 1967. And you'll read all about how many people have met the commander. He has met every president except Bill Clinton since 1957. So he's not a mystery. He's a known entity in our world. And he is in charge of all these Victor ships that are now arriving. Now I have a picture of Doc. My wife and I first met Doc back in 2005, and Doc would give us seminars every 6 months that my wife and I would attend. Unfortunately, Doc passed in November of 2008. He's been gone for almost 3 years, and his passing is rather unusual, I might say. And I will tell you more about Doc in the next program. But he was a wonderful man. He was a ordained minister. He held 3 PhDs. He was the president of a university in Los Angeles. So needless to say, Doc was a really neat guy. And he also wrote many books and DVDs. This is one of his most unique DVDs. It's called Mysteries of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It comes in a 3 DVD set. And then he wrote many other books as well. He wrote a book on angels, one about God, about Nazi UFOs. This one is The Secret Place of the Most High. That's another angels. Wrote a book about the Star of Bethlehem, the White Planet, some of you may have heard about, the authority of Jesus Christ in this book, Millennium 7, and the UFO conspiracy. So Doc was a very prolific writer. Well, here's a man who is the ultimate authority on UFOs. And he does have some credibility, I must say. He's the founder and president of the National Investigations Committee on UFOs, called NICUFO. He's the president of the International Evangelical Crusades, which was a worldwide Christian denomination. And he was president of the International Theological Seminary of California. He was educated in New York, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and California. He held degrees in theology, psychology, and criminology. He was an assistant deputy director of the California State Marshals Association, and he was a former national chaplain of the American Federation of Chiefs of Police. He had numerous affiliations with law enforcement, scientific, religious, and public service organizations, and had attested to his dedication to community service. His university and college presentations were recognized as an important contribution to the understanding of the truth about the UFO phenomenon today. Well, the strange part is, Doc had all these qualifications, and he was so highly respected, but I always asked Doc, I said, how come you never made the mainstream? He was never invited to any shows about UFOs, History Channel, Discovery Channel. Even Larry King had a talk show on CNN, and during 1 week, a few years ago, he called in all these experts on UFOs. But Doc was never invited, and it was very, very strange that they ignored him. Well, it's because he was telling us the truth. He knew about what's happening now, that we were going to have 3,000 ships arrive this week. And the major media, the four groups that control everything you and me and all the rest of us in America are allowed to see, did not want him to go mainstream. They didn't want us to know about what's actually coming. Now, whether the media is behind this, the government's behind it, the religious organizations are behind it, whoever it is, they don't want us to know the truth. But it's happening. It is happening. Now, in addition to Doc's books that he wrote, I've got a little booklet called Attributes of Valiant Thor. And this is kind of like crib notes for Doc's book, Stranger at the Pentagon. What I did was to go through and pick out all the unusual attributes of the commander and how they played a role in people's lives. And it turns out to be, on the index page, there are, I think, over 50 different incidents of times when the commander did some amazing things to save people, especially Doc. Doc was continually under attack by very evil forces. So you can see the Mothership. She's 14 miles long, 7 miles wide, and 7 miles high. And these little black dots that are coming up to her, those are the Victor ships. Here's a 300-foot wide Victor ship. Here is a 300-foot wide Victor ship. And the Mothership is in orbit around our planet, and NASA knows about it. They've actually had encounters with the Mothership. So we are approaching the end of our time. I have 30 seconds left. And what I would like to say is that last weekend we commemorated 9/11, which was 9/11/2001. Well, we had an event last week on Friday that occurred on 9/9/2011. If you put those together, we now have 9/9/11. Aloha and ahui ho. Aloha. Welcome to Departures to Alpha Centauri. My name is Merlin, and I'll be your tour guide tonight. And we are joined by Ricardo, my neighbor, who's also going to help out. Ricardo, can you tell me something about yourself?
Retired real estate mortgage consultant. I'm here from California. temporarily. Trying to find a second home. I was born here in Safford, Arizona, about 100 miles from Tucson. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, he's going to help us with phone calls, so if you guys will call in, he'll be the one pushing the buttons, and you'll hear him first, and then we'll try to answer your questions, whatever you have to ask us. This program is sponsored by the United Galactic Federation of Planets. We have a video we'd like to show you. In the program last month, on September 17th, I talked to you about how unidentified flying objects, UFOs, often appear in clouds. And I used the examples of Independence Day and also close encounters of the third kind. Well, tonight we're going to talk even more about close encounters. And the name of this program, believe it or not, is Life Imitating Art. Now, normally it's the other way around. Art imitates life, but we're going to show you tonight how life is about to imitate art. As you watch this, you're going to see clouds and spacecraft coming out of those clouds, and then as the clip continues, you're going to see something awesome. The movie came out in 1977, 34 years ago, so it's, believe it or not, a third of a century old, but it's as appropriate today as it was when it came out in 1977. So at this point, let's watch Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Welcome back to reality. That is one of the most awesome movies and segments that you could ever watch. If there was ever any way to give us hope that maybe these visitors from beyond our world are our friends, that's got to be part of it. The whole movie is outstanding, and I strongly recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it. And for those that have seen it, I recommend you watch it again. Ricardo, what'd you think?
I'd like to research a little bit more.
Okay.
Very interesting.
September 17th, I did a program where we talked about how on 9/9/2011, ships started coming in. And at that time, we had over 3,000 Victor ships, just like the one in this poster. These are 300 feet across, and they started arriving in our world. The ships are commanded by Commander Valiant Thor. He is an extraterrestrial who's immortal and has played an important role in our world for the last 54 years. He arrived here back in 1957, met with Eisenhower and Nixon. So our government does know about these Victor ships and Commander Valiant Thor. Well, that wasn't the end of it. As I mentioned, on September 9th through 15th, we had the Victor ships, 300 feet wide. They came in and were visible when they arrived. So in order not to terrify the people here in Tucson, they had to hide themselves in clouds. And for those 7 days, we had just continuous monsoons. The ships were hidden in the clouds, and the weather forecasters were just flabbergasted because the monsoon season was supposed to be over by then. And instead, we got an entire year's worth of rain just in that short 7-day period. It was amazing. Well, then the next 2 weeks, the 3rd and 4th weeks of September, we had more ships come in. And these ships were between 2 miles in width, 12 miles in width, and 20 miles in width. And these ships also came in clouds, and the weather forecasters were flabbergasted because we continued to have monsoons, and the monsoon season was supposed to be over. But all during those 3rd and 4th weeks of September, we had one monsoon after another, and the ships came in clouds. Then, October 1st, last Saturday, something amazing happened. Another monsoon, and this time the ships that came in were 50 miles wide. The ship that we just saw, the ship up behind us, that one is 2 miles wide. We're talking about ships 50 miles wide. These also came in visible, and so in order not to terrify people, they had to hide themselves in clouds. And sure enough, on October 1st, we had another monsoon. And the weather people were like, this is unbelievable. But that wasn't the end of it. Tuesday last week, on October 4th, we had ships come in 200 miles wide. Now here's the problem. A ship that's 200 miles wide, if it came in a cloud visible, it would block out all the sun and it would get dark. So those ships had to come in invisible, and they did. They were 200 miles wide, they arrived invisible, but in the process they caused very high winds. And those of you that remember, on Tuesday last week, we had real strong winds all over Arizona. We had sandstorms up in Marana and in Casa Grande, Phoenix, all over the place. Well, as these ships came in, they started disturbing the air very significantly because they are 200 miles wide. Then the last group of ships came in on Thursday, just 2 days ago. They arrived on October 6th. Those guys were 500 miles wide. Now think about this. The state of Arizona is about 260 miles across. These ships are twice the size of Arizona. These ships could reach all the way from here in Tucson, clear out to the Pacific. And they are so huge that they block the sun. Now think about this too. We see in the visible light spectrum. Now that is part of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, and visible light is just a little small piece. On one side of visible light, we have ultraviolet, and on the other side of visible light, we have infrared. These ships had to be invisible, so we wouldn't see them. So they weren't visible in our section of the light spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum, but they were still visible in infrared and in ultraviolet. Well, the heat that we get from the sun is infrared. And when you have a ship 500 miles across, it's going to block out sunlight. And on Thursday, our weather went from summertime in the 90s and 100s to the 70s, and at nighttime it dropped down to 40 degrees. We had an instant change in weather from summer to winter in one day on Thursday. That was because of these giant ships, and they all came in over the western United States. So all the states that were west of the Rockies immediately experienced cold air. This is called a mothership. This one has been up in space above our planet for the last 54 years. It's the command ship for Valiant Thor, and our good friend Dr. Frank Stranges had been up to that ship many times. I talked about him in our last show. He passed, unfortunately, back in November of 2008, but he had been on board this ship. We have in our country an agency called the National Security Agency, the NSA, and they're kind of like what the CIA is to people outside our country. The CIA spies on everybody outside the United States. The NSA kind of spies on everybody in the United States. And the NSA came out with this report back in June in which they said they have received radio messages from outer space. And they have also declassified a whole series of reports that talk about UFOs. So for the first time in history, our government has finally acknowledged that UFOs exist. Up till now, they haven't. They've tried to ignore it. And one of the reports that came out from the NSA talks about these extraterrestrials. And they use the Fermi paradox as an example. Enrico Fermi, was a physicist during World War II. He helped to develop the atomic bomb, and he came up with 3 possible scenarios. And in the third scenario, he talks about how ETs may be treating us in what's called the zoo hypothesis. They are staying intentionally invisible, and they are treating us like a wildlife preserve, which is to be observed but not fully incorporated into the galactic club, or as this document talks about, the United Federation of Planets from Star Trek. Well, if you recall, the sponsor of this program is the United Galactic Federation of Planets. And in the zoo hypothesis, they say that the ETs will not contact us until we've reached a certain milestone, like the discovery of light speed travel. And that's where we are. So at this point, we'd all like to say aloha, ahui ho, and until next time.